Welcome back to Chain of Thought, everyone. I am your host, Connor Bronston, and today I'm joined by Carly Taylor. Carly is the field CTO for gaming at Databricks and founder of ggAI. Carly, welcome to the show. It's great to have you here.
Thank you. It's so good to be here.
It's really honestly exciting for me to have this conversation because, similar to you, I have always been fascinated by the field of gaming, both tabletop and digital. And as you've noted to me before, gaming has driven the advancement of GPUs, graphical processing units, and it's really the tech that has built the current AI boom as we understand it today. I know most people understand at least a little bit of this story, and I'll recommend the incredible acquired episodes on NVIDIA if anyone wants to go much deeper from a podcast format. But can you start by connecting the dots a bit for our audience? How did the video game industry enable today's AI boom?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I could talk on this for an hour, and I actually have before at conferences to the nerds who are interested in things like this. But, it really goes back to even before the first GPU hit the market, which was invented by NVIDIA about 25 years ago. Gamers have been pushing the limits of what their computers can do since we started making video games on computers, right? I think back to Rollercoaster Tycoon, which was written by Chris Sawyer, I think is his name.
For the record, one of the best games
One
ever.
of the best games of all time, still, and it has staying power, right? And
Yeah,
what's
I
crazy? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
no, I was just gonna say I picked it up on Steam recently and played it for a day, and it's just like, yes, this
Still
is
good.
nostalgic. It's still fun.
Yeah. What's crazy about that game is that he wrote that entirely by himself in assembly. And
Wild.
the reason that he did that, and anyone who programs will know, like assembly is like the nerdiest of nerds languages. You're basically talking straight to the machine at that point. And the reason he did that was because the CPU at like power at the time couldn't handle the types of things he wanted to do with like guest interactions and the way that he wanted this game to work. So in order to hyper optimize this game, he just wrote like pure machine level code so that he didn't have to deal with any abstractions or anything that would slow down like what he was trying to build. And I think that kind of encapsulates the gamer mindset, which is like your only limit is your imagination and what you can build. And they won't let things like compute power slow them down. And so I think that, that mindset set up a trajectory for gamers to continuously push the limits of what compute could do. When the first GPU hit the market, like I said, about 25 years ago, I think it was called the GeForce 256. It had the processing power of like a potato nowadays, right? Like it,
Yeah.
it was very rudimentary from what we consider today, but um, over time, as GPUs started to become more used in gaming, they really accelerated graphics processing and the ability to make worlds richer and look more vibrant and look more realistic. You want more polygons, you want things to look more real, like you need a better GPU. And that consumer drive forward not only, made NVIDIA the company that it is today and allowed them to innovate and be the best in the world at doing what they do, but it drove the price at every point of those GPUs down. And you can actually see this trend over time when you look at basically the cost to do a calculation on a GPU. The best way to normalize it is like, what does it cost to do some sort of matrix calculation? And the cost for each calculation over time has just gone down continuously. So now we're at the point where we have these insane data center GPUs that are used, primarily for generative AI. They're not really used for gaming, although that would be sick. Um,
Oh, I mean, I can only imagine what that
yeah,
experience would be
right.
like.
You're
You wouldn't be
like
able to use all the capacity, but it should be fun to
running
try.
it everything at like the highest setting possible. Your electric bill's like $80,000. Now we're at this point where it's it was possible to build those data center GPUs at the point that they're at today. And that's not to say they're not expensive. I think one of those is like 70 grand. Those aren't for people to buy, those are enterprise level. But, without the push, the consumer push for GPUs and the acceleration in that development and making things cheaper, making each of those calculations cheaper over the years, I don't think that we would have been primed for the AI revolution that we have today because the compute power necessary is just incredible.
Absolutely agreed. And it's interesting to see how the CUDA ecosystem and everything NVIDIA has built there really set the stage for this last 10 plus years of development in AI. And as you mentioned, you've gone deep on this topic before, and maybe we'll have to have you back for another full episode where we just focus on that. But I love that you've been able to carve out such an interesting niche for yourself here as a director of engineering at Activision, then Microsoft, a founder, an influential industry voice with over 170,000 LinkedIn followers today. You've obviously done a ton of public speaking, and you're one of the lucky folks who gets to talk about video games and their impact on AI and data every day. What first made you fall in love with gaming? Was it Rollercoaster Tycoon? Something else?
I think that was definitely part of it, if I'm being honest. That was one of my favorite games. But I guess I've identified as a gamer ever since I was really young. I started playing video games with my mom when I was probably too young. Nowadays, they'd say, don't let your kids sit in front of screens. But I was like this far away from like an old CRT TV, just with my nose straight up against the glass. And I think that as an only child, like experience of not just playing with someone, playing with my mom, later gaming on, like sitting next to each other on the couch, playing video games with your friends was like just such a vibe. And then growing up into multiplayer online games, I think that it's just been something that has been part of, for me, like recreationally, but part of my life since I was young. And then it really like I think the role gaming played in my life was really exemplified for me during COVID. Because, like everyone else, I was stuck inside. But also, like everyone else, I was playing Warzone basically constantly with my friends. And it was a great way to talk to people because we were all so isolated. So we'd all sit down, make a drink, hop on, and just kind of just like talk crap with one another and hang out. And yeah, it was a really good time. And it was at that time that I saw the job posting at Call of Duty. And they were looking for a data scientist. And I remember talking to my squad on Warzone and saying, they're looking for a data scientist for Warzone. Wouldn't it be crazy if I got this job? And like the rest is history. But yeah,
Love
I
that.
think I've just been a gamer. I don't know anything different.
That definitely resonates with me as well. I'm right there with you with Roller Coaster Tycoon. And then for me, like my first time really getting into coding, like I'd started to do a little bit helping refurbish computers on basic stuff around getting using a command line to actually refurbish them and update the software. But then it was like building websites for a RuneScape clan I was running. It's like honestly my first
That's
time doing like
awesome.
quite a bit of coding. So it's funny to see how gaming will drive folks to take on these new challenges. And you mentioned the social collaborative element. I was doing a ton of Among Us during the pandemic, where it's like my friends and I would get together and like, let's do a little murder mystery together. So I totally hear you on that, and it's really cool to see how you've not only been such an integral part of the industry and seen it up close, but have applied your background as a coder and data scientist, and looked at uniquely, I think, how traditional game development has a kind of a data problem. So let's set the stage for this conversation with some grounding in how game development happens, plus how game data is captured, since I think that'll help inform this whole conversation around applying AI to gaming and how it flows into one another. So we'll dive into the intersection of AI and gaming a bit later, but can you walk us through how games are traditionally built, particularly focused on how data and telemetry fit into that process?
For sure. Yeah. I think it depends. Like the traditional game development process is going to vary based on if you're at a startup, if you're bootstrapping things yourself, if you're a AAA game studio, it might look different. I think the unifying theme, though, is that game development is creatively driven, which is good, right? Like that's how we get these immersive worlds and these really enriching stories. The issue with traditional game development, though, is that when you're coming at things purely from a creative standpoint and you're translating that into engineering requirements for how the world needs to be built, you're thinking about data, but you're thinking about data to accomplish a singular goal, which is to get the game outdoor, right? Everyone wants to make ship. Like that's the goal, right? And you see when things get pushed back, like Grand Theft Auto just got pushed back again. Like there's a community reaction and there's a cost to not shipping your game. And so like these deadlines are taken very seriously. And working in game dev, I can tell you that like you are constantly counting down the minutes until you go to alpha, until you go to beta, and then until you go to ship. And again, driving that process is this creative iterative process. There's green lights, there's all sorts of things that studios are balancing and juggling and trying to get just to get the game out the door. And from what I've noticed, oftentimes data ends up becoming a second class citizen in those conversations because while critical to the game development process and specifically to the live operations process, which is how you support your game once it's out, you can still ship a game without data. You just won't know anything about what's going on. There's things in telemetry that you need to know. And as the game's being built, engineers put this in because they need to see if things are working properly, right? They want to capture, did you or did you not kill that boss at the end of the level, right? Like those things are very critical to know. There's other things that might not seem important until you realize they're extremely important. Things like the session length of a player, if they got stuck in some onboarding step somewhere, right? If your controls or your mechanisms or your game design has something that's too hard for people to pick up or something that's unintuitive. Those are things that you can answer with data, but you have to be extremely purposeful about how you're defining the scope of what you're trying to understand and how you're going to reflect and look back upon the decisions that were made. And the unfortunate reality is that when you're coming up against ship, the first thing to slip is like, well, whatever, we'll figure it out when we figure it out. Or we'll see it in game reviews if people can't get through onboarding. We'll hear from the community. And there is some piece of that that's part of this. But the in-game telemetry, again, often just ends up becoming a second-class citizen because shipping is the most important thing. And it's never, unless it's something extraordinarily important or some financial metric, it's never a block to ship a game. It's just a really nice to have.
It's such an interesting, I guess, illuminating fact because, from the outside looking in as someone who's just a casual game player, not working directly in the industry, obviously the term AI has existed in gaming for decades and, referring to NPC behavior. And so my expectation was just, oh, of course, there's so much data being collected because they have to fuel these, non-traditional actions, potentially deterministic, potentially non-deterministic, based off of, how a player is interacting with the game and, the settings you have applied. So it's almost confusing to think, oh, data isn't a first-class citizen when it comes to gaming. So, I mean, you mentioned this pressure to ship as a big part of why telemetry sometimes kind of gets forgotten here. Is part of the challenge here that studios aren't really having the conversation in advance about what do they actually want to leverage that data for until after the game is live because they're just saying, hey, we got to ship this thing? Or why do you think these kind of crucial data strategy conversations are happening often too late in the process?
Yeah, I think that that's a good question, and that's a good guess. I think that there is a lot of data. It's not always an issue that the data isn't even being collected. So like that is definitely part of it. It's like if you're not actually instrumenting the telemetry, like I said, if it's a second class citizen and it's not there, it's not there. But the question then becomes, even if it is there, what are you doing with it? The gaming industry is world class in a lot of things that they do. But I will say that the data adoption curve for most gaming studios is probably behind where you would consider most tech companies in terms of best practices for where the data needs to go. And that a lot of that has to do with like every game is so different and a lot of them have these extremely complicated, especially for online games like server client architectures. How often are you putting data where it's going? Are you saving all of your data? Are you sampling it? Where are you putting it? How are you transforming it? And then, that's just the question of where does it go? Then you have all these other questions about how do you transform it and get it business ready? And those aren't always immediately obvious answers, especially since the people handling the data are game devs. They're not business analysts, right? Like they know what they care about in their game, but that might not align well with what finance or marketing cares about, right? And in order to find a harmony where you have everything captured that everyone could possibly care about, you end up in a space where you're doing a lot of trial and error. And unfortunately, in the game space, trial and error is expensive. Dev time and time to get things into the, live build, like we're talking 6, 8 weeks sometimes. So missing something is very expensive. And I think it's really just now becoming so obvious that gaming not only is a huge opportunity in terms of the number of people who play video games. I think we probably had this idea of the industry from 20 years ago, where the only people who play video games are like, you know, the kids in Stranger Things who are also playing D&D. Like it's like this weird nerd habit. And I don't think that that is proven true. I think mobile games have opened up a whole new world for people. And so when you have anything that's being massively adopted across the world, you're going to have behaviors that you don't understand. Even if you've played your game 1,000 times, it's nothing like having 1,000 different people playing your game once,
Hmm.
right? Like the possibilities, like the feature space of things people can do, people break things very creatively or like,
Yes.
and that's just part of the human experience. And I think, unless you've done it before, like these AAA studios are getting a lot better with data because they have to do it all the time. But it's still been in the past maybe 5 years that data has become something that's taken more seriously and that has a proven ROI. But if you're not set up to, you might be even capturing your data. If you're not set up to act on it, then you have another problem. Like, are you prepared to do experimentation? Are you prepared to make changes if you see that people don't like some mechanic? Like, are you prepared to just like rip something that you like out of your game based on feedback? It sounds obvious, but some people are not willing to do that because they feel like they understand things in a way that data can't capture. So if you don't have a data first mindset of the people who are looking at it, it doesn't matter what it tells you or if you're capturing it or if you're seeing anything because no one's going to listen to it.
You're bringing up so many good points here. And I think where I want to start is maybe the most basic example of this idea where we're always designing for how we think a customer is going to interact, no matter the business, whether it's gaming or something else. We think, oh, they're going to do this, and there's always a creative way that they break it and they do it differently from us. And I want to talk about this difference between QAing and testing and games and game design versus how things happen in actuality as players actually get exposed to it. But to me, it almost is simpler. Like there's this very common video, we've probably all seen it, of a cup with little holes for shapes in it. And it's like, oh, like what shape do you put in which hole? And every shape goes in the square hole because like, oh, they all fit in there. It's we don't need to put it in these designed holes. And I always think of this image. People who've listened to me in different podcasts have probably heard me reference this before because it's just the one that always sticks in my mind when we talk about this like design problem of how is a user actually going to use this? It's like, oh, they're going to find the basic use case, they're going to apply it, and they're going to go, oh, I can spam magic missile in this game, and I'm just going to keep hitting people with magic missile. I don't need to try these 8 other things, so I can just hit them with more magic missile. Um, and this comes back to that difference of QA teams playing a game versus how the general public plays it, and like how 1,000 weird gamers like myself are going to go break things in different ways. How does this gap impact the usefulness of data collected before a game hits beta or a full launch compared to once you have all these different folks trying and breaking the game in unique ways?
It's crazy because you don't realize your own blind spots or your assumptions until they're tested by people who are coming at it completely like with brand new eyes, right? A lot of this can be circumvented if you have like a good user testing framework, right? So a lot of the big studios will bring in random people off this, literally off the street, like for play tests to see how they play. And I've seen some of these play test areas and they're crazy. Like they do eye movement tracking across the screen and see how you interact with things. And that's very high tech and can get you a lot of the way there. But it still cannot account for regional differences, right? Like,
Oh.
are you doing play tests in every market you're in? Like, probably not. Like, you try to get good demographic data, but it's hard to. So, like, are your translations in game landing in some country where something is not a norm and people kind of don't understand what's supposed to be like a well understood social interaction that leads to some mechanic? Like,
Hmm.
it's easy to take those things for granted. Uh, and it's also easy, well, not easy, it's hard to truly test the resiliency of your infrastructure at scale. So companies will obviously do stress testing of their data pipelines, of their servers, of all of their architecture to make sure that they can handle what they would expect at like a launch capacity. They'll stress test all their systems and make sure that they're not going to completely implode. But there's nothing like a production environment to truly test the things that you've built. I posted this on LinkedIn the other day. It's like a funny joke, but it ends up being true in more industries than just gaming, where you have users saying like, "Hey, can we hire more QA, to test the product before it goes out?" And the company just says, "We have QA. They're called users." And like,
Yes.
the sad truth is that it ends up being like a lot of weird mechanics, bugs, holes in the maps, like, just stuff that is kind of hard to find. Doesn't get caught until you unleash thousands and thousands of people who are getting into crazy positions and taking vehicles where they were never meant to go and just doing all the wild stuff that a bunch of roving bands of lunatics are going to do, you know?
But as you mentioned earlier, this also creates a secondary problem of how much are you actually going to react to that user data?
hmm
And it sounds like there's a lot of disparate approaches across the industry and maybe hurdles that have to be overcome to push an update and actually react quickly if something is buggy and broken.
It's hard. Yeah. So, I mean, you're thinking like a lot of gamers don't realize this, but let's think about a game that is on PlayStation, Xbox, and PC, right? Like the standard stack of platforms. To get a game like update, let's say like just on PC, I worked in security. Let's say I wanted to do an update to a kernel driver that's only on the PC version of the game. So I don't have to touch PlayStation or Xbox, but I need to send a PC patch out. How often do you think in this case, Microsoft for PC updates, like how often are they going to let me make everyone who plays my game update just to get a security patch on? Like,
Oh,
can I make people download an update every day? What if I have to do it across all the platforms? Like how much of an update is worth updating for? I'm going to ask someone in rural Australia to pay like a crazy amount because they went over their data cap this month because I forgot to put a piece of telemetry in the game, so I have to ask them to download an update. Like there's certain things that just are not critical enough to justify the user friction to push out things like that. I'm not saying security is a really big one that is justifiable, but there's other things that are like nice to haves that sorry, I'm not going to make, millions of people around the world download an update because you forgot to get a session length telemetry marker in the game. Like it's just not going to happen. So like you'll get that data when you get it, but it'll be maybe in a couple weeks. And that's if you can get like a fast patch out. For other things, I mean, we're talking like a build process. 6 weeks usually is the time frame you're looking. Like you're looking at your new content for a season update. Like you're months ahead. You are testing early. These build pipelines are long because you have to make sure you're not going to break things with PlayStation. You're not going to break things with Xbox. Like they have to all play nice together. It has to get into their store. Like, this actual pipeline for development, we have to do our own internal QA. PlayStation has their own QA for certain things. Like there's a lot that goes into making sure a patch is safe and is okay to be put into a game. And data is usually not one of those things that you can say, like, hey, can we spin up overnight QA resources? Because I forgot this piece of data. Like, we're going to need to pay people overtime to work overnight because we have to change this patch and everything has to be QA tested before it goes out. Because you never know. You could put a piece of data in and it could break something.
yeah.
I've broken games before with data updates. Actually, one I did really badly because I flipped a greater than less than symbol. That was a fun one. But
It's
you
always
have
the
to,
simple mistakes.
oh my gosh, always. So you have to, I mean, you have to test that stuff, right? And so the pipeline for that is long. And if it's not an immediate thing that needs to be done because it's a breaking change, like you gotta wait.
So, from your perspective, what does it look like for a game studio to actually unlock the full potential of their data? How can they more effectively design their games to get the data they need from the start and then leverage that later?
I think it starts with really the question that everyone wants to know, right? Not just in gaming, everywhere. How do I get value out of my data? Everyone has too much data and everyone wants to know how to get value out of it. Nobody wants to just ignore it and leave it on the table, right? I think in the year 2025, very few people are like, no, I don't use data. I just go off vibes, you know? So if we start from the question of how do I get value out of my data if I'm a game studio, well, you need to figure out what kinds of questions you're always asking yourself, what kinds of things that you feel like you have a good handle on, and what kinds of things you feel like you have no idea about. Like when you last shipped something, what were you completely blindsided by? Was there something people loved or something people hated that you should have probably seen coming? Was there something that broke that you probably should have been prepared for? These kinds of things will come up the longer you do it. And the more you realize, like, okay, like the more postmortems we do, the more retrospectives we do, the more we look at what every executive is asking after every single time we launch, we'll realize, okay, these are the low hanging fruit questions that we're always trying to like scramble to answer. And then you start incorporating data, people, whomever that is. That could be your data engineers who are handling getting the data somewhere. That could be, your head of data analytics who's responsible for like, who's on the hook for actually answering the questions once the data comes through. It should be all of the above. And you should be including these people in the development process, probably pre green light. Like before every green light session, you should have at least one debrief about like, how are we looking with telemetry? Are we going to have the things that we need to answer the questions that we deem are important? Like, what are we trying to accomplish with this game, right? Or is it a sequel? Are we trying to get new, like, it might seem obvious, like you want people to play it, right? But I think every game probably also has some other things they're trying to do. Are they trying to further some IP? Are they trying to tell a new story? Are they trying to reach a new market? Are they trying to change from hyper casual games to more like, serious games? Like, what's the studio trying to accomplish with this game? And then what kinds of questions do you think we're going to answer? You'll never get comprehensive, but if you start asking yourself that early, you won't find yourself caught flat footed. And I can tell you the worst time to be caught flat footed is often during your beta. Because for players now, it used to be that beta was like, well, if it's, broken in beta, we'll fix it before we ship, right? Like beta is where stuff's supposed to be busted. But what you'll find is that you are asking the questions of your beta cohort that you're gonna ask in the live game. And that's great if you're like, oh crap, we can't actually answer that. That'll happen. But you shouldn't go in totally blind and say, well, we don't have any data. These are all the things we want to know. We won't know because we didn't have it for the beta. So at least we'll know by the time we get to live because you can't act on anything you could have learned in the beta. All you're learning is that you weren't prepared from a data perspective. And then players also have an expectation of betas now that they're a
Yeah.
bit more polished, that it's going to set the stage for how your pre-orders are going to look. It's going to set the stage for what people's expectations are. It's going to set the stage for reviews. And so if you are going into beta thinking beta is when we're going to make our data decisions, like you are way too late. Like even alpha probably, like it's a good time to have those questions if you've waited that long, but that might also be too late because depending on how much telemetry you're missing, you're touching a lot of pieces of code. And that's risky. You really want to be doing this as you're building, so you can kind of de-risk it and kind of build gradually as opposed to like a mad dash at the end.
Yeah, you're absolutely right that there is, I think, too often, not just in gaming, but many industries, this mad dash at the end of like, oh shoot, we have to go fix this thing that we kind of knew we were gonna have to do and we didn't plan for it necessarily. And as we've alluded to throughout this conversation, one of the key trends that is reshaping how we leverage data today in gaming and beyond is AI. And while AI has existed in gaming for, as we've referenced, things like NPC behavior for years, there's obviously a lot of new stuff here with generative AI. How does this traditional game AI contrast with the new generative AI wave and the updates that have happened to machine learning as it's exploded over the last 20 years? How are you seeing all these changes in game data and these improvements in telemetry intersect with I guess, the opportunity for gaming studios from new AI technology?
You know what is so funny about this conversation about AI is that as a someone who is involved in both the industry side and now on the vendor side at Databricks, one of the biggest companies in AI, I've seen, I've personally witnessed these conversations happening where I'm kind of just a bystander. And the way that game studios and vendors are talking past each other without even realizing when they talk about AI is like hilarious to me, but also like an easy area for me to make an impact at Databricks because I'm like, hey guys, here's where we're completely missing the mark when we talk to them about this. Like, I can tell you, you are having three just completely parallel conversations and no one is actually talking about the same thing. And you think you are, but that's why there's so much friction, is like no one's
Interesting.
understanding each other. And that's because of exactly what you just said. Game studios, developers, gamers have been talking about AI forever. We were probably the first people. Not only did we set the stage for, AI as we think of it today with GPUs and adoption there, we also set the stage for people to even use the word AI. I mean, maybe not, but like, come on, we popularized it. We're the ones that used it colloquially the most, right? Even calling someone an NPC now is like a meme, right? Like
Totally.
gamer culture is everywhere. And so when you have a vendor come to a game studio and say, like, we're going to help you build intelligent AI, they're first of all thinking in-game AI. That's all they're thinking about. They're like, okay, so you're going to make our NPCs not so stupid. That's great. That's feedback we get all the time. Like,
Right.
yo, we love the game, but like, how could it be more immersive? If so and so didn't have like a specific talk track, like, make it a bit more freeform. Um, that kind of thing is good. But the issue becomes when you come to a game studio and you say, yeah, we're going to make your AI like, do X, Y, and Z. Even if we're talking about in-game AI, we're going to make it so smart. It's going to be able to talk to the player. It's going to be able to remember everything they did. It's going to do blah, 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 blah. All these lofty promises. What no one, except for me, to toot my own horn, in the vendor space has been able to tell anyone is like, okay, well, how are you going to do that? Like, you realize we're resource constrained. Where to show me, like, is the compute to do this in the room with us? Like, how? you
Yeah.
know every in-game AI has been like hyper optimized to run because that's what game companies, that's what gamers have had to do, going back to Rollercoaster Tycoon. You got to make this actually work with what you got, right? And not everyone has the $70,000 NVIDIA GPU ready to go to rock the latest game that you
I
want to
wish I
play.
had that, right?
I know, right? Like, we're dealing with min spec, like the minimum specifications to play the game. So not only that, but the question of LLMs within gaming is super interesting to me because it's like, okay, in games, traditionally, you have two choices. You will run something on someone's client, so like on their PC, on their PlayStation, whatever it is will be locally computed, rendered, whatever, or you'll run it on a server if you're in a client server architecture. That will be run in some data center that everyone is connected to that server. And then whatever the server does will talk to the clients and tell them what it decided, right? Those are your only two options for where to run things usually.
There are constraints on both of those, to your point.
100%, right? Like normal NPCs run client side, right? Like they just have to like walk around the map and whatever. And some of them are running on the server, like depending if it's a bot. But if you're playing like an open world single player game, most of that's local. If you're like now we're introducing, let's say, okay, yeah, we'll just put an LLM on it. Someone's proprietary LLM that we trained to make the NPCs have cool conversations. Where are you going to do that inference? On the client? You could, I guess, if someone had a really good GPU, but what are you going to send your trained model to someone's computer and just give them your IP? Model weights for LLMs are worth hundreds of millions of dollars, billions maybe. Think of OpenAI. Are they going to give you their trained model weights for ChatGPT? That's
Yeah,
their IP. Like,
I guess
they
you'd
would never
probably
do that.
realistically have to use like a local instance of like a llama model, for
Yeah,
example, as like really the only
like an
realistic
open
option right
source
now.
something. Yeah,
Yeah.
like, and that's cool. So then how do you integrate into that? How do you make sure that it is going to respect your IP, that it's going to have maintain the voice of the character that you like? Like, does that feel good? Okay, well, let's say then you're going to fine tune it on your own data. Well, now you have an IP issue again, right? Because now you're leaking your IP back by giving it to people to run locally. Okay, then you say, well, then run it on the server and just send the information down. Game servers don't typically have GPUs. They don't need them because they're not rendering anything. They don't have screens. It's a server. So like, where are you? So the question becomes, you're telling me you can do this thing, but you're not actually giving me any ideas for how I can realistically do this. Now there's another option. It's not just the server or the client. You can have something else in the loop. Like we have this all the time. We have VMs that sit next to servers with the data, right? Data comes out of the server, goes somewhere else. Like those aren't the only two options. You can run things and send them down to the client that doesn't come from the server, or you can send information to the server to send to the client. That's all reasonable. But no one's really talking to game studios about that. They're just saying, oh, yeah, just put an LLM on it.
Yeah, I think this speaks to the kind of common problem that's happening in a lot of, call it AI marketing today, of just considering an LLM as a magic bullet instead of a
Mm-hmm.
really useful tool that has constraints, to your point. And it feels like the opportunity with gaming for the moment with AI, beyond the MPC piece already, which has obviously been there for quite a while, is more about like, okay, how are we leveraging all the data we collect and applying AI to our analytics? Or are there QA opportunities with LLMs, and throwing them at games earlier so that you can have that user experience of like all these disparate testing? I'm curious if there's much happening in those directions so far.
I see those as being much easier problems to solve and much more realistic problems to solve. So, specifically with AI, with your data, right? The good thing about modern data infrastructure, Databricks in particular, but every good data provider and product suite is offering something similar, is that once you have your data in a place where it is centralized, it's governed well, right? So, like you're legally compliant, you have everything in a place that needs to be. You have all of your reporting built on top of it. You're understanding your business cases. You're building your business ready gold standard, gold layer of data. Like you have all of your really good data principles handled. There are tons of products that are integrating directly into your data warehouse, directly into your data catalogs, like with Unity Catalog and Databricks, like getting directly in there and you can get AI natively within the platform, right? So if you have good enough metadata, which is just a description of what all your data actually is, which is actually harder to come by than you would think in gaming. But once you have good metadata, you can ask AI to almost anything about your data, right? Like self-service analytics is here in a big way, like in a way that even a year ago, I wouldn't have believed it would have been possible and it had accelerated this quickly. So like we're opening up doors for non-technical people, people who don't write SQL every day, to ask questions of their data in plain language where they can say like, "Hey, how did I don't know, how did that skin sell in last week's 420 sale?" Like we did a collaboration, did
Yeah.
people like it? Or, what types of skins are people loving? Or what was our most popular game mode in the last week? Did we see any crazy things pop up on Steam this weekend? Have we seen any data outages? All of that stuff can be somewhat automated and somewhat self-service, which is crazy and incredible. So that's part of the AI that when you go to game studios and you're like, we're going to help you build AI, they're thinking in game AI. They're not thinking, oh, I can have an exec self-service their small data questions so that my data team can continue answering the big ones and putting together the long form financial reporting, putting together these really intensive deep dives and experimentation like A/B tests, causal inference things that we're doing. And they can just ask the silly question that they had about like, do people like the new map? Like the things that are like interesting, but kind of derail conversations when you're talking about longer term analytics projects. And then the other one you brought up is very interesting, which is a bit touches on the NPC conversation kind of, but it also touches on machine learning and advances in machine learning, advances in in-game bots that we've had going back probably 10 years. And reinforcement learning is big here. And I'm talking about how do you help your human QA team by building more automated QA and reinforcing all the work that they do with automated QA bots? And that's also not an easy question to answer because you have to have a really tight pipeline. Because basically, what you're doing is you're using your human QA testers to train the reinforcement learning bots, how they do their jobs. But then every time you introduce an update, the human testers have to take the lead because these bots don't understand these mechanics on their own. They learn from people. And
Hmm.
they need to learn from QA because you don't want to have them learn from players play testing because now you're backwards. You're
Well,
having
and as you put it, the
players
players are
generate the
lunatics.
data.
So
Yeah, the players are lunatics. Also, you don't want your users to be your testers, right? You
yeah.
need to test this stuff before users ever see it. And so this ends up being a really interesting question and an interesting problem space. I've seen a lot of movement in the like automated QA. I don't even know what other people are calling it. Yeah, just automated QA arena. I haven't seen anything yet that's like fully compelling to where I'd say, okay, I'm willing to like smoke test with a fleet of these bots and trust it. Uh, I definitely wouldn't trust it for a full QA pass. But I do think where it's going to help is, like I said, if you have these crazy, you've got to do an overnight test and you have to just get good enough and you need these bots to run through along with a couple of humans and you don't have that many people online. I think that that would probably be the best use case scenario right now, where like as long as it's not fully breaking something, it has to go out because it's some sort of critical patch. Um, but yeah, I think there's going to be more advancements there as well. You just have to be mindful of like anything, what does your pipeline look like?
Are there other use cases or opportunities that you're seeing for AI in modern gaming today?
Oh, tons. I'm building something right now with a group of people where we're pulling in Steam reviews. And not only are we, leveraging that to try to do some of our localization. So, like, can we train an LLM or just use a pre-built one? Can it understand the colloquialisms of gaming and can it effectively translate different languages, understand sentiment of reviews? But also, can you then generate reports based on those reviews, regardless of the language, but including localization information so that you know, like, oh, hey, there's something wrong with like the French version of the game into like emailed reports for execs. Because that was something that we saw a lot was we had our community managers online basically 24/7 having to scroll through Twitter, which like they should get a bonus just for having to spend time in there. And having to scroll through Reddit, which again,
Maybe a bonus
another,
again. Yeah.
yeah, double bonus. um, and having to just like scroll through all these things and try to synthesize the information on their own. And the way a lot of that used to work is you'd have your community managers doing that. And then they'd say, okay, a lot of people are talking about like, I don't know, the French version of like Bowser. Like he sounds weird. And then they'd have to set up listening on their social listening tools for like French Bowser. And then they can go through the data that they're scraping and find instances of that. But someone has to know that they need to look for French Bowser to begin with. You end up in this chicken and egg scenario that you kind of have to know your problems in order to look for them in your massive data. And where LLMs succeed a lot here is that you don't have to give it you don't have to say, hey, go look for Bowser and tell me like where you see an issue here. You can just say, what are people talking about? What do they care about? Has there been any emergent conversations that seem different from what you're used to seeing? Are there any topics that seem like they're gaining traction? And then it can say, oh, yeah, people are mad about this French Bowser. Like, he does not sound right. And
Honestly, I'm just
then
struggling right now because I am in my head now picturing Bowser with a French accent, and I'm gonna have to go find this after the show. So,
I just made it up, but that would be hilarious. Oui,
uh,
oui.
um, I'm curious, as we're wrapping up here, do you see gaming continuing to push AI forward as it has enabled the GPU revolution, or in other ways in the coming years? Maybe it's going to simply add French and Spanish Bowsers, and we can experience those for fun. But what other ways is gaming going to impact AI development going forward?
I think, in the ways that it continues to or has always historically, like gaming is really for me the space that I think humans probably other than like writing. It's like the open world where humans can be as creative as they
Hmm.
want. right? Like it's where the only limit to what you can accomplish is your imagination. And so, as we want to be more and more imaginative with the worlds that we occupy, as we want to do more and more with our technology, as we want more and more people to experience things simultaneously online, like that all happens in games, right? You think of like Fortnite, the events that they have, they've basically built best in class online networking systems
I've
for
gone to
large.
concerts in Fortnite, which is weird to say.
Yeah, no, but like when you think about the feats of engineering that it takes to put those concerts on, you realize like nothing would have ever propelled the needs of real-time online networking and multiplayer experiences if it wasn't for gaming, right? Like who else would have been innovating in that space? Zoom? Like maybe kind of, but they still can't even really handle big webinars. So like it's gamers who like they want to do this stuff and they're like, can we now? No. Can we figure it out? Hell yeah. So it's that spirit of just like, this is what I want to build. This is what I want to create. This is the kind of world I want to see. And we're going to do it. And it's so funny because I see a lot of people talking about, there is this inherent friction between creatives and engineers where they're like, wouldn't it be cool if we could, whatever? And like one of my favorite engineers I used to work with would say like, yeah, if only it wasn't for the pesky speed of light, you know? Like like
Yeah.
that's always the limit. Like there's always some inherent friction. But the good thing is that like the creatives I've worked with, like their goals are so lofty and not grounded in things like reality or the speed of light or like, physics or where the rest of us live
Yeah.
that like they force us to like constantly push forward. And while we might joke about it, like there's so many things today we wouldn't have if it wasn't for gaming. And I think it's going to be, who knows where we're going to end up. I think it's going to be crazy though.
That
It's
is a
going to be
great
cool.
note to end on. And honestly, for anyone who wants to see where this all goes, I highly recommend following Carly on LinkedIn, where she shares so much interesting content and perspectives on the industry and what's happening with AI. Carly, I am deeply appreciative that you joined me for this conversation today. It's been a ton of fun. Where else can our listeners go if they want to learn more about you and about your work?
You can find me like on LinkedIn for sure. And I also write longer form content on Substack. So we can
Fantastic.
link
I'm
it.
going to have to subscribe to that as well. And definitely check out all the incredible stuff that Carly is doing both with ggAI and Databricks. There's a ton of really cool AI and gaming things coming down the pipe. And we'll link everything, including Carly's LinkedIn and all these other links, in the show notes today. So, Carly, it's been a distinct pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And to everyone who is listening, if you love video games as much as we do, maybe drop your favorite games in the comments. If you're watching on YouTube, we'd love to hear from you. Is there a game that got you excited about programming and technology? Or is this something where you're just kind of interested and you're following along? Are you a Stardew Valley person? Stellaris, that's me. Mario Kart, what are you playing? Are you Warzone here with Carly? How are you
French Bowser.
relaxing? French Bounce. Uh, Honestly, I may have to put French Bowser in like I'm gonna have to like sneak a French
I want to
Bowser
find
Easter
him with a
egg
little
in.
beret.
I mean, this feels, I will say, if it's probably already a thing that I can just go look up. But if not, it's absolutely something I'm going to have to generate from
Ask
AI. So here's an AI
ChatGPT to
use
do it.
case. Yeah. And while you're leaving that comment, make sure to like, subscribe, and follow Carly on her Substack and or her LinkedIn. Thank you so much for tuning in to Chain of Thought. We'll see you back here next week. And Carly, thank you again. It's been great.
Thank you. Bye.